The exhaustive searches with the police and with friends and family have not discovered her, so we have to look at our possibilities.
It's clear that Scott was planning to go somewhere for quite a while. Investigators search his car and find close to $15,000 in cash, 3 credit cards, and camping gear. But there's more that the public hasn't heard before.
One of the things that really wasn't talked about a lot is he also had a couple of neckties in there, some dress shirts, some dress shoes. I mean, he could go from having dinner at a resort, in Acapulco, to camping up in the mountains within about, 4 hours.
Police also find a map of Fresno, where Amber Frey lives and works.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay, how is everybody? So it caused a big stir when the Los Angeles Innocence Project announced that they were taking on the Scott Peterson case, which if you've lived under a rock, it's probably one of the most famous true crime cases. He murdered his pregnant wife, very pregnant wife. She was almost 8 months pregnant, Laci Peterson, and her unborn son, Connor. That's what he was convicted of in 2004. Laci went missing on around Christmas 2002. I was not surprised. And let me tell you why. That the Los Angeles Innocence Project took up Scott Peterson's case. I was not surprised because I've been studying the wrongful conviction movement for the past 6 years of my life. It is my area of interest in true crime is innocence fraud. After studying pretty much every celebrated case of innocence that the Innocence Project has done, and finding not one case of innocence and finding instead one person is more guilty than the next, I saw this coming. First of all, I've done 2 shows on Scott Peterson, one with Erin Banks of the Crime Piper blog. She knows everything about this case. And we'll circle back to her in a minute. And I also did a review of Rabia Chaudhry, Adnan Syed, Heyman Lee's killer's advocate, Rabia Chaudhry, and Ellen, their podcast that they did on this, saying, oh, we all thought that Scott Peterson was guilty, but he's very innocent. And it was just the pitchforky mob that made everyone lose their senses, and that's why he was convicted. And they went back and did a full revision of the case, conveniently leaving out a lot of very damning evidence and throwing in a lot of pet theories of the defense that were rejected by the jury. So, and they brought it up like new evidence. There's nothing really new in this case. But I'll tell you why I think Scott Peterson is guilty. Besides the evidence, the mountains of evidence that I've gone through in 2 episodes, but just some things you might forget. He didn't know. So Scott Peterson, Laci Peterson's and Connor's body was washed ashore the San Francisco Bay. Scott Peterson was fishing in that area that on the 24th, December 24th, the day before Christmas. He said that he thought of going golfing. He was going to go golfing, but it was too cold, so he decided to go out on the water where it's a lot warmer and not breezy and drafty at all. He decided to go out on the water in his boat, and he strangely didn't know what he was fishing for. He didn't know what kind of bait he was using. He said when he came home, he washed his own clothes, but he ignored dirty rags piled on top of the washer. His house smelled like bleach. There was a mop and a bucket. And he said Laci was 7 months pregnant, almost 8 months pregnant, was mopping. Laci's purse and jewelry was found on her bed. He asked if grief counselors would be made available immediately. And on Christmas, he asked this of the detectives, and they're like, we don't think we can get them. And if Laci's found, you won't need them. And he's like, no, the attitude was like, no, we're going to need those grief counselors. So how was he so sure? He backed out of a polygraph. He bought the boat secretly. He was researching tides and currents as well as the weather that day. I mean, there's so much stuff. Pliers, the hair found in Laci's hair was matched mitochondrially. Her DNA was matched to it's not a match. She was among a group of people, and it did not fit Scott. Her hair was found in the pliers. And he told his mistress, Amber Fry, that he lost his wife on December 9th. That's the same day he bought the boat. He tried to sell land. He sold Laci's car. He tried to sell the house, and he had other affairs. And he was eventually found with $15,000 cash, a tent, dress shoes. You saw that in the opening clip, and a map of Fresno. So was he going to go after Amber Fry? That's the big question mark. So, and he also asked for cadaver dogs on the day after Laci went missing. So that is my summation. Let's get into the Innocence Project stuff. So my feeling is I saw this a fairly decent case considering the other cases I've looked at from the Innocence Project. And I know that this episode will be controversial because they have so much money, the Innocence Project. And if you oppose what they do, it's like being against wrongfully convicted people. It's like saying, let wrongfully convicted people stay in prison. And I don't think anybody would want to take that position. My feeling is, from studying this movement, that it is the biggest fraud in America that nobody's talking about. And our press does not have the time to go through the transcripts and find out what the real evidence against these people is that have been convicted. Of course, they never use the word convicted. They use the word accused. So, sorry. Here it is. This is what I was looking for. So the Innocence Project, it said on January 18th, they announced this on X, 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project filed motions seeking DNA testing and post-conviction discovery on behalf of its client, Scott Peterson. Any and all inquiries about Mr. Peterson's case should be directed to the LA Innocence Project, a non-profit organization wholly independent of the Innocence Project. And so what this means really is, so first the National Innocence Project supported the Los Angeles Innocence Project and in this endeavor. And then when it caused pushback because the public is very educated on this case, and very seldom does any Innocence Project, whether it's a state, city, or the National Innocence Project, pick a case. They usually pick cases where you are not familiar with the case. They don't usually pick famous cases and try to get that convicted killer out of prison. And they use the public's ignorance. And this is where the press really comes in. Usually the role of the press was to push back a little bit and debunk some of the untruths going around. But unfortunately, it sells more papers for them to go with the Innocence Project narrative. They have liaisons that just hand them everything to write. It's easier. They're on a time schedule. They don't have the time to read the transcripts. And often they don't even approach the prosecutor. So the days of balanced journalism, of showing both sides. And of course, the Innocence Project has an ideology, which they don't talk about, which is they don't believe, many people in that movement don't believe anyone should do more than 20 years. So Scott Peterson has done his 20 years. So it's not so much about innocence as it is, let's get Scott Peterson out of prison. He's done his time. And that ideology is also coupled with the notion that our real problems, the real victim is the killer, because our justice system is so unfair. And so one of the things they do is ignore the victim altogether, if not disparage or re-victimize the victim's family. They make the killer the victim. So I wasn't surprised. So everybody was like, oh, breathe a sigh of relief. It's the LA Innocence Project. It's not the National Innocence Project. Let me tell you, all these Innocence Projects work the same way. There's never has anyone in the National Innocence Project said, oh, we don't like what they're doing on a state innocence project or a city innocence project. They all work the same way, which is they try to DNA test something. Oh, they work a lot of different ways. It's not always, like to say they only take DNA cases, but often they will take eyewitness cases and find eyewitnesses and get them to recant. Whatever the strongest piece of evidence, if it's a confession, they'll get false confession experts to say it's a false confession. And in this case, they'll want to test the DNA. So if no DNA of Scott Peterson is found, they'll say, voila, case closed. So, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to say that the LA Innocence Project that molds themselves exactly in the National Innocence Project's mold doesn't have anything to do and is wholly independent. So let's take a look at Court TV covered this. But one of the I wanted to also bring, before we get into that, I wanted to bring to your attention that Scott Peterson in the opening clip says Laci's body has not been discovered, which I found very telling, because you discover a body, you find a living person. And it also makes me think that he put her somewhere, like in the San Francisco Bay, where he didn't think she could be discovered, or he's hoping to hide her. So usually we discover things in crime cases that are hidden.
Yeah, the Los Angeles Innocence Project is jumping into the case for the convicted double murderer. They filed several motions asking the court for permission to test several items, saying in part, quote, evidence has been discovered that points to Mr. Peterson's innocence.
Innocence? What are they talking about? He, of course, was convicted back in 2004 for the death of his wife, Laci, their unborn son, Connor, in Modesto, California. The main evidence that led to his conviction included a couple things, mainly the fact.
So they're going to make this all about his affair, that it was all Amber Fried, and that he would have won this case had he not been having an affair, and the rest of the evidence doesn't matter. This was a huge trial. This started in June, and a verdict didn't come back till the middle of November. So if it were just Amber, you'd think that would take maybe a week at most, very quick trial for no evidence. So they're going to mock everybody who thinks he's guilty. They're going to prop up the Innocence Project, as our national media tends to do, because they're so rich. And it's also a organization filled with lawyers. So they also work with some of these lawyers at Court TV. They don't want to go against it.
That the bodies of both Laci and Connor turned up in San Francisco Bay. And that, of course, is where Scott Peterson was there fishing in his new boat the day of Laci's disappearance.
And plus, the thing that really stands out about this case were the bizarre interactions Peterson had with investigators and his mistress, Amber Frey. She helped the investigation by secretly recording Peterson while his pregnant wife was missing. Those recordings were played in court, and Ted, you were there, front and center inside of that courtroom during this trial.
So his pregnant wife, no mention of Laci's name or Connor's name.
And those recordings were a game changer. They shifted the entire trial. He was, it looked very good for him until that point, even with the fact that the bodies were found in the bay, because it was announced.
See, it looked great for him. And I've read the transcripts of this case, and maybe there could have been a few jurors willing to go the other way until it's a case of circumstantial evidence, which DNA is, by the way. People forget that. But a lot of circumstantial evidence, a lot. It was a long trial. So they're going to say, oh, the state had nothing until Amber came on the scene. And then everybody was like, it was a moral panic. Everybody was turned off by her.
His alibi was announced within 24 hours of Laci going missing. So the theory from the defense has always been someone else did this. There was a robbery across the street. Those robbers took her, dumped her in the bay once they found out where Scott was. But Amber in that courtroom killed it for him, because those recordings were of a lying, horrible man that had a beautiful pregnant wife at home. And a couple of the things he said at one point in one of those recordings, he said, "This is going to be my first Christmas without my wife. She's gone." This was 2 days or a week before she went missing. It was part of it. The question now is, so the LA Innocence Project, what do they have in their filings? And I've read through them. They reference this new evidence. Well, they're also asking the court to test some old evidence. A van that was found on Christmas Day, the day after Laci went missing at the Modesto airport. And I remember at the time, that was a piece of
a burned out van that was determined to have nothing to do with this crime. They want to test it because that's a safe area. They know they're not going to find Scott Peterson's DNA in there. And when they don't find DNA, they declare innocence. Even if it is, look at the case of Purvis Payne. That's a case I've covered, where they retested the evidence. His DNA was found on the handle of the knife, but there was also some incomplete, meaning it would never be attached to anyone DNA. And that's the story the press ran with, that he was now innocent because this DNA that was probably just hanging around the kitchen knife was found. This incomplete DNA that would never, ever be matched to anyone absolves him of the crime. Never mind that he was caught literally red-handed, covered in blood, running from the scene of the crime, ran into a police officer, amongst other things. And his fingerprints, DNA was all found in the scene. He testified at his own trial, said some very damning things on the stand. Anyway, that's another Innocence Project case. And eventually his death penalty conviction was overturned, and he was given life without parole, so he may be paroled. This is a man who killed a mother, her baby daughter, and tried to kill her son, Nicholas Christopher. So Charisse Laci, that was her daughter, and Nicholas had to hold his intestines all the way to the hospital. So I would just advise anyone that before they send their money to the Innocence Project on any case to read the transcripts.
Like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Poo-pooed by prosecutors. They want to test some materials found that washed up with Laci's body in the San Francisco Bay, specifically this bag, as they call it, a Target bag, not Target, the store that we're used to going to, it's a shipping company that has plastic, and some duct tape around it. So why are they targeting this? I talked to the attorney that's been representing Scott for many years, and yesterday, back and forth. He says they have been totally briefed, and they're looking at specific items that they're zeroing in on, and it's going to be fascinating.
This is willy-nilly. This is serious.
The Peterson family and Scott has been maintaining his innocence for years, and we've heard this time and time again.
I love that. I love that argument. He's always maintained his innocence. That is more common than not. Very few convicted killers come out and say, I did it. And Scott Peterson has already had his death penalty conviction overturned, and he's been given life without parole in California. So I love that that's some sign of anything. That's the norm, not some unusual fact.
The robbery across the street. Well, one thing that did happen after, I don't know if you remember on Court TV here, when they had the big jury inquisition. There was
Strawberry shortcake.
Yeah, strawberry shortcake. They brought her into San Mateo County to question her about the process. Well, he lost that, right? The judge ended up ruling against him. But it was in the news every single day in the Bay Area. And someone contacted Scott Peterson's sister, Janie, after this was in the news, and said, hey, I have this information, new information. Could it be related to that, I wonder?
Wow, that could be a game changer. It's a story that so many people know. It's iconic when it comes to murder trial.
So they've already tried to overturn this conviction on a jury misconduct. That didn't work. This family has a lot of money. He was represented by Mark Garagos, who is one of these high-profile celebrity attorneys. I witnessed him in the courtroom. He represented Claire Bronfman for a little while at the NXIVM hearings that I went to. And he's slick in court. He's very smart and very slick. So the fact that even with all this money spent on his defense, he was still convicted should tell you something.
Let's bring in our guest to discuss this in California. Our guest who's been standing by this hour, Joseph Tully's good to see you. Tell me your reaction to the LA Innocence Project taking up this case.
It's very, very surprising. I would say borderline shocking, but being a defense attorney, it would take more to shock me, but it's extremely surprising. As you pointed out, the Innocence Project doesn't just take anything. There had to be something very real, very concrete to get them interested in this.
That is untrue. I would ask this lawyer how many Innocence Project cases he's familiar with and how he's familiar with them. Is it just reading what the Innocence Project or media says about them? How many cases has he looked at of the Innocence Project? Because what I've seen is that they'll take anything. They'll overturn these things on anything. There's a case in Ann Arbor I may be doing an episode on. I've been promising it forever, but the guy was caught on videotape, ID'd by his father when the surveillance footage was shown on TV, and they got a height expert to say, oh, he's not the same height as the person, even though a lot of very damning things were found in his home, like the clothes he wore. I mean, it's just, and I believe the gun. I mean, this is madness. And what the motivation is, so there's two motivations. So why would they want to release guilty people? Well, there's the ideology side where they just want to, I believe, take apart our justice system. They feel it's unjust. And they have passed so many laws. The Innocence Project has worked on passing laws that are more and more defense friendly. And the other side is the money side. So when they do get someone like Scott Peterson out, they will sue anyone they can for his quote unquote wrongful conviction in our civil courts, where the bar of evidence is much lower. The judge is not going to be familiar with the case. And they get these multi-million-dollar judgments. So it's incredibly lucrative, and it's a money machine. And right now, it's very hard to stop something that's making people money.
This case.
What I was referring to with this new evidence, we know that someone contacted Janie Peterson, and the story is, hey, I was in this room where this guy was talking about being one of the robbers and saying that, yeah, Laci interrupted the robbery at the Medina house across the street, and we killed her because we had to shut her up. 3 people were interviewed.
This is old news. I go into this with Aaron Banks, if you want to hear the full story on why this is a nonsense, a nothing burger nonsense stuff.
Viewed by the defense team and an investigator. They signed affidavits, and Scott actually filed it because he's lost his representation. Now he's not on death row. He filed it in his own writing from his cell. But part of the equation was they couldn't find the actual person who these people were talking about, right? So you had these declarations, but where's the guy that was talking about it? Could it be Joseph? Maybe the Innocence Project found the guy. He gave them a version of what's going on, and that's why they're targeting their requests in terms of DNA testing. If he said, yeah, we had that van, we wrapped her in that plastic, well, that might make sense.
Sure, yeah, we do know from their filings the Innocence Project is citing to the burn ban. They want DNA testing. They wanted witnesses who saw Laci walking her dog that morning.
There's multiple problems with that, with the dog walking story. Witnesses some have died, and their husbands have moved the time. And one of them said, I believe the wife, who's now deceased, said that she saw Laci's tattoo on her ankle while she was in a moving car. And Laci was not in a position where she could have seen that. So there's a lot of sus things about those witnesses that saw Laci alive, and why she was having a really difficult pregnancy. She was not up for heavy duty walking down a steep hill to a park with no jacket. And apparently Scott doesn't know what shoes she was wearing.
And they're citing to things related along those lines. So what I've seen exactly supports what you're saying.
Yeah, there were several witnesses that did not make it to the witness stand at trial who reported seeing Laci walking the dog during that morning. And if
they didn't make it to the witness stand because they weren't credible, don't you think someone like Mark Garagos would have put them up had they been credible? He knew they were going to get destroyed and crossed, so he didn't call them. I love how the Innocence Project, we have all these new great ideas that weren't covered in a long trial from June 1st to, I think it's November 12th. So, I mean, believe me, I've read the transcripts. It was they put on a very aggressive defense. Mark Garagos is no slouch as a lawyer.
If any one of those people is correct, then Scott's innocent, just because of the timeline and the way things worked.
If any of them are correct, but so forget every other piece of innocence. If you can get someone to buy the one eyewitness testimony, and then that wasn't brought up in trial, then Scott Peterson's innocent. And that's how basically this movement works. Find one little thing, and of course that would say that she's alive, but try to verify that 20 years later. what is it, 22 years later?
The defense
Unbelievable development.
didn't bring them on, so that's interesting. The Innocence Project also wants to look at that. To me, they're asking for old evidence to analyze it, but they keep referencing new evidence in their motion. So
Do you think it could be a new angle on that evidence or a new look? But that could be the witness that you're mentioning.
It has to do with this robbery or at least a van, you know, an abduction, and it sounds like they've got an identity and they want to connect it with some DNA.
And Joe Natale, I just want to ask you the follow-up on this.
It sounds like that, but unless you can verify that they have something new, of course they're going to tell the courts they have something new. So many times these appeals and requests for testing are all old things that have been gone over.
Is that even if there is this new evidence, I mean, we see appeals. So we see defense attorneys finding things that went wrong in the first trial, things that went wrong in the investigation. They file that in appeal. But when the Innocence Project takes something, they have to take into consideration the optics. They have to take into consideration what it would mean to help someone who...
They don't care about the optics because they know that the press is going to come to their defense. So the Innocence Project has already said, we have nothing to do, the national one, we have nothing to do with this rogue LA Innocence Project. And everyone's like, whoo. And you can see Gloria Allred has come to their defense saying, oh, they should absolutely test this DNA. She was Amber Fry's lawyer. I've watched so many news pieces where they're all supportive of this. So the momentary outrage has really quelled thanks to our press.
Has a very bad reputation when it comes to those who remember this case, remember just seeing that smiling photo of Laci and thinking about Connor. Is that even more so the likelihood that there may be actually something to this possibility of his innocence?
So what she's saying there is because the Innocence Project has a good reputation. How? I don't know. I think I've already told you how. This is a multi-billion-dollar movement. So the Innocence Project is so rich. And they present themselves like the underdog. And they pay for their PR. The press is happy to go along with it. Who wants to go after an organization that cloaks themselves in righteousness? Not many. I'll tell you, it's not fun to do. I mean, I've been called like a secret cop, a prosecutor bootlicker. They'll always insult me. They'll never dispute any of the things that I've said with any facts because they haven't read the transcripts. So, yeah, this is the reason they're taking the Scott Peterson case is because they think they can get him out. And it's been more than 20 years and they think they can do it. And they want that money from our civil courts when they sue for his quote unquote wrongful conviction. It'll make them very rich.
Sure. Yes, I think that while there wasn't any direct evidence or barely any direct evidence linking Scott Peterson to the murder, there was very strong circumstantial evidence. I remember to me at the time when the news was coming out, finding like cement powder in the boat, the same boat that he went fishing in around the time of the disappearance. That was strong circumstantial evidence to me. But I also think that, you know, it's not enough for the Innocence Project to say, hey, there's new evidence. They have to say there's new evidence that's tied to an actual defense of innocence. So they can't say, hey, here's evidence that might have raised a reasonable doubt. They have to say, here's evidence that supports actual innocence of Scott Peterson and have an uphill battle going forward in the appellate court system on that.
Right. They have an uphill battle, but they have so much money. And this is a movement that never quits. So Yeah, I think they'll continue on. And it's a great point that this defense attorney makes, that they can't come and say, oh, we have the same old evidence that we've tried to present, or that was rejected by the jury in court. They're going to, of course, call it new evidence.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Is that at this point, he's exhausted a lot of his appeals already. He's off of death row, so he doesn't have Cliff Gardner working for him anymore, who's a fantastic appellate attorney in the Bay Area. He's in this position where the Innocence Project is fantastic. And Pat Harris, talked to me yesterday and said, this is great. We couldn't be happier to have them fighting this battle.
Really? Why are they great? Love for them to answer some of these questions. Why are they great? What are some of their great cases? Johnny Lee Gates, Purvis Payne, Jamie Snow, West Memphis 3. I don't know. What are their great cases? Darlie Routier. There's a famous case that they've picked up.
Joseph, you mentioned the cement. He made anchors, and he admitted that he made these anchors. The state opined that he used them to weigh down Laci's body because that's the only reason that how he could do it. They're trying to figure out how he pulled it off.
Not that the state opined. Now it's just like the state's idea, and he wasn't convicted. It's not like the jury presented it and they proved it in court because the jury and it's been upheld.
The cement residue, he had an anchor there and he used them and he made them and he admitted that. All of the, if you deep dive this, and this, I've done it for years. Here's the problem with this case. It's always bugged me is that you see him, you hear him, you get the details of what he did with Amber and all these lies. And you think, oh my God, he did it for sure. I said that many times. He did it for sure.
Yeah, because you hear weird coincidence after weird coincidence, and you see someone acting and talking way off the spectrum of normalcy. And so you're saying it's just a coincidence that he had no concern, that he seemed to know that he lost his wife December 9th, and she suddenly goes missing on the 24th. That's just a coincidence. He asked for cadaver dogs. It's just that we're all rushing because we're so disgusted with his affair. And by the way, he had more than one affair. He had affairs with multiple women.
For sure. Then you sit through the trial, you go through the evidence, and you're like, wow. You would think that X, Y, and Z there would have been blood in the house. There would have been something. There just isn't. It's not 100% for me. And I know.
Because you're a fool. You're a fool. Try to say, what are the chances that all those coincidences? I'm sure you think Wendy Adelson is innocent too and didn't know a thing. It's foolish. Foolish.
A lot of people make fun of me and say that I'm a dumbass for not thinking that he's killed.
Yeah, I'll be the first.
But I've always had this weird sense of there's like a 5% chance the guy didn't do it. And now the Innocence Project.
So he's 95% sure. So it's beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond any doubt. And what does that 5% consist of? No time for that. They're going to close it off here. But I wanted to show you some of this. I talked about some of this stuff that was presented in Robbie and Ellen's podcast as new evidence with Aaron Banks. Let's take a listen. This is his defense demonstration of that he could not have meant to show that Scott Peterson could not have dumped Laci and Connor's body over the thing because it was just too difficult. Let me control myself. Yeah.
Three. Release your weight.
Okay. Then it goes into another, but you can see him tipping himself up, like not quite, not quite, not quite. And he's like,
I mean,
the demonstrator's like pushing the whole thing, and it's still not going until he finally is parallel to the water. Does the boat tip over? No?
It's ridiculous. I mean, you have to know that, first of all, that was Rafi, right? He was Garrigo's paralegal at the time. He was a very short man. Peterson is 6 feet, and obviously this was a tiny little man. It was like Danny DeVito's twin that had to be weighted down to even come close to the weight of Scott Peterson, who was a little chubbier at the time. And it's just, you can tell. I mean, just like you say, you can tell he's desperately trying to tip over the boat. And he's almost.
This is it's just so ridiculous, but they try everything. One of the things that Robbie and Ellen bring up is this van sighting.
Oh boy.
What is that van? Can you describe what that what they say that sighting was? And
right. That's the Harshman tip that you're referring to, or at least I think you are. So
yes, thank you.
Harshman, while out driving in his car, spotted a lady leaning against or squatting down to take a pee at a fence, right? And he says there was a guy shielding her, hovering over her. I mean, first of all, that's not nefarious, okay? There was a pregnant or a slightly overweight woman peeing, and a guy she was with guarding her from view, very ironically, from people like Harshman, watching people pee in public for some reason that only he knows the answer to, right? Maybe that's the thing. I don't know. But then Harshman said he saw someone pulling her back into the van again. So someone helping her up into the van, being pregnant or overweight, points to an abduction, really, or this having been Laci. And you saw all of this while speeding by at 40 miles an hour. You didn't race after that car to save that lady's life or note down the license plate and call the police. You also have to take two other things into account with the whole Harshman debacle. First of all, the burglars didn't have a van. Okay. They didn't even have a car. Stephen Todd hauled items out of the Medina home that was burglarized on the 26th, not the 24th, not the 25th, as Team Peterson sometimes states. They had to get the burglars' mommy's little Honda to try and get the safe. They didn't have a car. The only van parked out on the street was the Peterson's neighbor, Amy Crickbaum's. It was a white van with green lettering. So any witnesses saying that the burglary happened on the 24th because they saw a van there, they're mistaken. They should have seen two vans in that case. And of course, you know, the insurance claim agent who investigated the case noted down black and white, the burglary happened on the 26th. Now, if you know a little bit about insurance agents, you know that they definitely don't get it wrong. Okay, they're trying to get out of paying. They're trying everything in their power to nail down the times, the people, and the circumstances. And the police investigated and corroborated it. The burglars passed their polygraphs. So that's just a couple of more unchangeable and unalterable facts. And the second thing about Harshman is the timeline. So the burglary, they say, happened on the 24th at 11:40 a.m. But Harshman saw the pee lady in the afternoon. And I think he said it was like between 2 and 4. So you have these two burglars driving around Modesto in a van they somehow must have gotten after ditching mommy's Honda, just letting their victim enjoy the scenery and letting her pee against fences in broad daylight so everyone can see her.
Why would you do that if you were kidnapped? Why would you do that?
I think you drive a walk for hours and hours with a victim in your car. It doesn't make any sense. So it's like the Truman Show. I don't know if anyone remembers that. I'm pretty old. So
Me too.
The people keep walking around the block, and Truman realizes, Jim Carrey, wait a minute, that's the same lady. She always keeps circling the block on her little bike. That's basically what they're saying happened here with the Hirschman tip.
That's so, this is what the thing that. So there you have it. So not only they're saying that there was a burglar did it. So what burglar doesn't want to pick up a pregnant woman amongst their burglar while they're going about their burglar things? Pregnant women have all sorts of needs. They're going to be looked for right away. It's just ridiculous, but it's part of one of these nothing burgers that the defense will put out, and the Innocence Project will continue to hammer home, or people aligned like Rabia and Ellen will continue to say there's some validity in that. So this has had so many of those kind of like, wait, everybody, this guy was just judged because he was having an affair. It's not legal to have an affair. It's morally repellent, but to some of you, but men have affairs. It doesn't mean they're a murderer. I mean, spare me that defense. As if the prosecution just got up and said, hey, this guy had an affair and we're going to put the mistress on the stand and you're all going to be so repulsed that you're going to vote to convict him. For those of you who really know the case, he was telling Amber Frey that he was in Paris when he was at Laci's memorial searching memorial vigil. And everybody was supposed to be concentrated on Laci and bringing her home. And it seems intimately connected. It's not just Amber and I would say you could remove Amber completely and still convict him. It's icing, but it's not the cake, certainly in this case. It pulls a lot of circumstantial evidence together. I just wanted to show you one other thing. So everybody knows the famous interview with Scott Peterson that he did on national TV where he wept, and people will point to his crying. They'll point that he as a sign of real concern for Laci. But I don't think anybody would be selling her things so quickly. But let's take a look at it. This is from the Laci Peterson YouTube channel. So for those of you listening on podcasts, this is what happened when Scott Peterson thought that the cameras weren't rolling.
How about it? Thanks. How do you, 2 parts, right? How do you envision breaking it up?
So he's asking about the segments. How are you going to air this? And people have remarked on the fact that he doesn't want to wipe his tears away or hide them, which is very unusual for anyone crying on TV. But if that's not enough, let's take a look at the press conference about him selling Laci's car. That's pretty interesting. This is Laci Peterson's family.
It's about, Kim. Thank you.
What if you've been here from the beginning and continue to support them? Brent Rocha and Ron Gransky wanted to make a statement on a couple things that clear up some rumors and answer some of your questions as far as the phone calls we've received. They will not be taking questions at this time. There will be a time when they would like to be able to take questions, but today is not that time. But they wanted to share some things with you. Thank you.
Well, it's a beautiful day out here today. This is the park Laci used to always come to, and nothing I'd love better than to see her back here. I want to try to answer some of the questions I know everybody has, and bear with me. I don't do this for a living. So, first of all, about the car. People are probably going to wonder how we found out about the car. We've driven by his house and we've seen a new truck there, and Laci's car's not there. So that's how we first found out about the car. And then we thought until we found out differently that we'd go ahead and purchase the car, and the car was in Scott's name, but thanks to Mr. Roberts, it's in the family's hands now, and we're going to keep it until Laci comes home. About the house is in both names, Laci and Scott's. I find it hard to believe that he thought he could sell it without Laci's signature. Of course, I found it hard to understand a lot of things Scott has done, so why should this be any different? He said since the first night he wanted the focus to be on finding Laci, not on him. Well, with things he's been doing and saying, the focus is all on him. You want to change the focus, Scott? Talk to the Modesto police. End this circus. Also, we've heard there's another tip line for information about Laci. The only tip line that we support and encourage the public to use is the Modesto police number, which is 209-342-6166, and the Laci Peterson website at www.lacipeterson.com. And one other thing, the baby is due on the 10th of February, which is this coming Monday. We've confirmed that date. It's not the 16th. I know people have been putting it in the paper and the news that it's the 16th. The date has been confirmed the 10th. Thanks for your support. Without you folks, who knows where we'd be. But please understand that this is not the easiest times for us. And especially with the baby coming close, it's not that easy right now. So I'm going to let Brent talk to you for a minute. Thank you.
I just want to let everyone know, thanks for being here. We do appreciate the media support. Laci's family and friends, I'm not going to comment on the car or the house. I'll let that to Ron. I think it represents how everyone feels in the family. But Laci's family and friends will be conducting searches during the remaining Saturdays in the month of February. The first search will be held this Saturday, February 8th at 9 a.m. and will include a search of the Delta Mendota Canal. Volunteers, friends, and family will meet at the Orchard Restaurant parking lot in Vernalis, which is near I-5 and Highway 132. Other tentative locations on the following Saturdays may include Lake Don Pedro on the 15th and Lake Pardee on the 20th.
Okay, so that's really, I really wanted to show you about the car and the house. So he wanted to sell the house until he realized that it would take Laci Peterson's signature on it to sell it. So then he gave up. Pretty interesting information. This is from the Laci Peterson YouTube channel. So according to it, Scott Peterson tries to sells Laci's car a few weeks after she suddenly vanishes. The dealer kindly sold it back to her family for $1. Isn't that amazing? The kindness of people in these situations always amazes me. Scott also inquired about dumping the house twice, but he found out Laci's signature was needed. Despite his warehouse having a lease that didn't expire until October 2003, remember, this was, Laci went missing December 24th, 2002. Scott also closed up his warehouse and had his mail forwarded to his P.O. box. How convenient to already have that ready to go, huh? He opened it one day before Laci's disappearance. 12/23/2002. What luck. You know what else he lucked out on? Having a 2-day fishing pass for his last-minute decision to go fishing on the San Francisco Bay, 90 miles from home on December 24th, 2002. The pass was purchased December 20th, 2002. It's like he knew something or something. It's like he knew or something. Weird. So I think I'll leave it on that. Does anybody have any questions before I go? Anne Marie Marin says, evidence deteriorated after 20 years, so they probably can't get DNA evidence. Right, so that's the point. But we also know it was that van had been considered, looked at, investigated at the time, and was determined to be not connected. But now, so are we saying no DNA now? We'll have to release this POS, piece of trash, 20 years enough time for murdering a beautiful young mom to be? It depends on the court. But look at some other cases. Look at my episode on Johnny Lee Gates. That's how he got released on some ties. There was none of his DNA on it, but those ties had been passed around a jury. And basically what they did is they got a prosecutor who was running for re-election. She lost. That's a whole nother story. And they basically bamboozled her to agree to overturn the conviction. And it was one of these convictions. A really good innocence fraud case does not take off till 14 years after the conviction, because the horror of the crime has to be diminished by time. And also, you want to go to by that time, most of the appeals have dried up. So when people say, well, don't you think we need an innocence project? Not from what I see, not the way this outfit operates. I think I call the appeals court our innocence project. I think we already have one. Yeah, Chesa Boudin, that's another thing, that Soros and the DA in Los Angeles, George Gascon, got together and put $50 million together and created the Equal Justice Initiative. And what they did was they sponsored former defense attorneys run for DA, district attorney. So in cities like Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, you have two defense attorneys talking to themselves in court, and nobody's representing the victim and nobody's representing the people. The sole concern of the court is the convicted killer. So that's really, like, which I think is the most evil of anything. I think even people who agree with me about the wrongful conviction movement would never want a convicted person, not to have a defense and not be represented in court and not have a good defense or a great defense. Yeah, Kathy Boudin. Yeah. Oh, don't get me started. There's a great book on all the radicals of the 60s, 70s, and 80s called Days of Rage by Brian Burrow. That book blew my mind. So I think we've done it, guys, unless anyone has anything more to say. But I hope I've answered all your questions as to why I wasn't surprised, why I think the Innocence Project is taking up this case. I will keep shouting about this movement as long as hard and as loudly as I can, because I think it's really destructive and immoral the way that they're going about things. That's my opinion on it. All right. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you at 6. I'm talking about Donna and why her arrest footage tells us so much about her state of mind, her future defense. It's supposed to be secret defense, but I think it was all given away in her arrest footage. We're going to be talking about that at 6. I'll see you there. Have a great